I wanted to talk in this video for our Digital Drama Workshops project a little bit about the importance of the place of youth theatre, where youth theatre happens, and one of the reasons why that place is important for young people. So it's the space of youth theatre, the physical space, and what goes on there, apart from making theatre. Why is it significant in the young person's life today? So in Ireland, at any rate, the places that are called public spaces are getting fewer and fewer. And partly this is to do with the idea that public space needs to be useful to a community. And we have in 2022, when we're making this video, we have a housing crisis, and we've had one for quite a while. It's also the case across Europe that there is this sort of crisis for housing, for residential areas, for people to live in. And so any space that becomes available to public use is pressurized into becoming development land or an opportunity for development. So when you think about where do young people gather or hang out, or how do they use public space, it's very interesting in Ireland. There are very few places where they actually are. They might be in a park, but not usually. They're sort of suspicious if they're in a park. People look at them suspiciously. They might be sitting on benches, and again, people look at them suspiciously. When we have spaces that are for public use, like theatres or public zoned areas, young people are usually the last to go in there. And people think, why have we got all these young people hanging around? I remember in our town, for example, there was a campaign to have a skate park for young people, and the big opposition was that young people would be in it. That was the big reason for people worrying about it, that young people would gather in it. There is a sort of suspicion in public life, in public discourse, in Ireland at any rate, that when young people gather together, one ought to be suspicious of what they might be doing. There's a woman called Stephani Etheridge Woodson who wrote a book called Theatre for Youth, Third Space, and it's fascinating work. In it, she speaks about the way her three daughters move through the public space. They're all young, you know, and she says we move through public spaces differently to adults. We as adults move differently to young people. Her teenage daughter, who's 16, moves directly down the footpath and she knows where she's going. Her 12-year-old is much more interested in skateboarding, so she's looking for bumps and cracks and slopes on the footpath as she goes along. And her 4-year-old is completely unaware that there is private and public space, so she's going into gardens and neighbours' houses and she's looking at flowers, and for her it's all one space. So we do use space very differently, and when we understand that, we understand that so-called public spaces are not actually designed for very many young people at all to use. They're designed for older people with dogs, primarily in Ireland, or for perhaps exercising, and also for children in regulated play areas. But there's the skateboarding is only for those who can skateboard or cycle, you would think, but nowhere are there benches and little huts when it rains, or places that young people can just hang out. It's why they go straight for the supermarkets, you know, and the malls. And so it's not that easy to find spaces where young people can actually come together outside of very highly organized activities like schools. There are athletic fields, there are tracks, races, basketball courts, and that's definitely a place where you'll see teenagers. But again, they're usually accessed at certain hours. They're supervised spaces, you could say. They have very regular activities going on in there, and young people go in for blocks of time, short periods of time. There are other spaces that are where young people can appear in public, and they're often to do with young people being in trouble, you know, like courts or in a sense, trying to solve a problem of young people, like having them in youth clubs, youth projects, and so on. So we find that our youth theatre place is important. It's the area in our town where young people from many different social backgrounds can gather, where young people from different schools can come together. And outside of that, they don't really meet each other. And what's happening is that they're learning in this space to be social, because there's not many other places where they can be. In my generation's time, when I was young, there were plenty of places you could be social. The journey to school, walking to school, playing outside in the streets, outdoors was a space that was full of young people, was full of children, of course, but full of young people as well. And it was a place where you learned to be social. Not so much anymore. Young people's lives have become very regulated, to the point that every hour that they spend in school is predicted, and outside of that they're going to organised activities if they go out at all. So a free space like a youth theatre space is vital and important, and they can come there just for more than just a workshop. In our space they come there to maybe meet their friends and create a project themselves, to come early before a workshop or a rehearsal and hang out, to stay after a workshop or a rehearsal and get to know volunteers, get to know facilitators, to call in on their way home from school, and so on. This space that we have for youth theatre, I'm always making the case and the argument that it should be pride of place in a town. It shouldn't be hidden away in an industrial estate, at the back of a factory, or behind a housing estate, or at some development that's not on the main street. My argument is that it should have the same pride of place as a major industrial outfit, a shop, a shopping centre, a cinema, somewhere like this. Unfortunately, we live in a very capitalist society, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever side of the fence you come down on that. And in this sense, according to the great playwright Christopher Lee in his wonderful Irish play, The Mapmaker's Sorrow, he says, all space is capitalist space. And all space is capitalist space. It needs to make a function, a profit. So when we look for spaces that make profit for young people, we find that there may be music shops, or we find that they might actually be a gaming station or a gaming shop or something like this. That's a consumerist space. And there isn't anywhere that they generally in public life have a creative space, a space they come together to create or to generate meaning. And this is really, really important. And it brings me to the second idea of this notion of what do young people do in this public space if you were to give them one. And that connects me to a Brazilian educationalist who was writing in the 60s and 70s called Paulo Freire. And he was in many ways a sort of a precursor to Augusto Boal that some people watching this video might know about, who was a theatre educator and a theatre maker from Brazil. But Paulo Freire spoke about the need of all human beings to be able to name their place, name the world around them according to their own terms. And of course, he's saying this as a colonized person. And we here in Ireland have been colonized. And many people who watch the film will come from colonized groups or colonized cultures. To name the world according to your own terms is not always that easy. It's not always that possible. And to do that, you need two things. You need a language, obviously, and you need a place in which to do the naming. So people who haven't got that resource easily use someone else's language, like a borrowed language or a colonized language. I'm speaking to you in English as an Irish person. English is not really my language. It's the language that I've learned to use. But there is another language, of course, and that's Irish or Gaeilge. And that's our native language, even though I don't understand it fully. As the great Irish comedian Tommy Tiernan said in his show Loose, around 2006, when he was touring the UK, when he was touring Canada and America, he said that Irish is the language of his soul, and that he has to speak to people in English. And he finds that English restricts and constricts what he can say. So there are a couple of words that help him break down this wall of English between him and the audience, and that they are curse words. So you know, we use a lot of curse words. He says curse words like fuck, you know, fuck you. These words cause offense to some people. These words are very strong, they have power. They really do have power, and there are a lot of them that we use that have extreme power to reach through directly a cloud of English into something else. And the difficulty with people using words like this is that they alienate sometimes the people who hear them. They offend them so much they don't want to listen anymore. And the people who hear them say things like, oh, it's lazy vocabulary. You need to increase your vocabulary a little bit. You need to rely on something other than these curse words or swear words or bad language. There is no such thing as bad language. Language is language. And the reason why most people use these curse words and swear words is because they've been colonized. And I'm not just talking about people who've been colonized out of their culture. I'm talking about young people who have had to learn a whole way of speaking, of identifying themselves according to the norms and the ideals of a society that they're born into, which is normal enough. They're being socialized into that. But very often they don't get a chance to name themselves according to their own terms, and so they end up using these other words to help them break through, express themselves, use these words to give some sort of ownership to what they want to say to help them express themselves. And what many young people want to name about themselves today is completely different to what older people like me name them. They want to have many different words for gender, for pronouns, they want to talk about their ethnicities differently to the way we talk about them. They have a vocabulary that they want to use and that they want to share. They want to call themselves their own names according to their own terms. That's very, very important. And there's no space in which they can do that except an online space, a virtual space, which is why it's important, sharing those kind of ideas. But in the real world, there isn't such a space, because all the other ones are regulated. How you speak, what you can say, who you can speak to, all of those have guidelines and regulations. In a youth theatre space, we politically and consciously choose to have freedom of speech. And that's significant. Freedom of speech means that you can curse. You can say things about your identity that I don't understand, because they're not for me. Young people don't name themselves so that I can understand. Sometimes they do, but mostly it's not for people, middle-aged white men like me. It's for themselves. You name the world for yourself. That's what Paulo Freire is talking about. That's an act of ownership of your world. Theatre is the only art form that helps you do that socially. And that's why it's really important. In the other art forms, many of them, you're working on your own. You're playing a violin, you are doing a painting, you're taking photographs, and that's all fine. You can still use that to name yourself, but nobody can hear you, really. In the social space, you have to be heard. Theatre is about being listened to and being heard, changing spaces, changing identities, trying on new identities, trying out what it's like to be called another name, to be addressed by a different gender, a different pronoun. All these things are part and parcel of a costume box, of a way of testing out ways of being. So ultimately, in that social space, theatre is about generating meaning for yourself, And we facilitate that through devising. It's one of the principal ways that we do it, but also actually through texts. And it's why the texts that we use need to be really good ones. And for me, as a 58-year-old theatre maker in 2022, I keep coming back again and again to the best cliched, the best theatre maker, which is Shakespeare. I keep coming back to his work with young people, and it's not, because of some inherited deference and reverence to this great English writer as such. It's partly that, I will say. I love his work, but it's also because it's so vast in the psychology of the multiple characters in all of the plays that young people can actually find relevance and meaning to their lives and understand their lives through working their way through some of the texts and the characters and the situations in a play like Hamlet. To give you an example, most people watching might know Hamlet, and we might say, in a very simple idea, in the very opening, there's the King Claudius who is speaking to the public, and he's telling them now he has married Hamlet's mother, and he's also going to deal with the external threat from Norway. So it's a public speech from a politician. And when he's finished, he turns to the young person beside him, who is Laertes. And he says, Laertes, you've been wanting to ask me something for a long time. And in his speech to Laertes, he says, speak to me, tell me. He asks him 5 times, speak to me, tell me what it is. But he doesn't give Laertes the chance to reply. He provides him with an answer. He explains why he can talk. He says what his relationship to Laertes' father is. He uses this moment, apparently designed to give the young person room to speak. He uses this moment for his own advantage, to tell the world how great he is at giving gifts and at answering people's pleas. So the young person, when we're doing this scene, understands that. If you explain it in those terms, you ask, when have you apparently been given an opportunity to name something, to request something, to have a free space, but found that you didn't really have that free space to speak the way somebody was talking to you? You knew that they really didn't mean what they wanted, and so on. And the young people say, yeah, this happened to me here, this happened then. So we're using Shakespeare to understand their lives, and then they come to the text a second time with this understanding and make it really true when they perform it. It's really real. It's not just an academic exercise. So Shakespeare helps us do this, helps us make meaning with young people and name things as they see them. So of course does devising theatre. And that's why it's very, very important to have a space, the physical presence of people in a room. In this project, we don't really have a space in a digital drama workshop program, but we can still do that with people together socially online, where they can see each other, where they can talk to each other, and where they can name the world according to their terms.